May 25, 1941, the North Atlantic, 500 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, Greenland. The young midshipman's hand quivered as he grasped the periscope's controls, not from apprehension of the foe above, but from what he had just perceived echoing through the metal shell of the U-boat 547. A sharp, unusual metallic resonance had impacted the submarine's hull, reverberating through every section. Fritz zur See. Herbert Werner would later pen in his personal log, discovered decades following the conflict, the sound was unlike anything we had prepared for. It reverberated through our vessel like a church bell proclaiming our demise. The British had located us beneath the waves. For 3 years, German U-boat crews had operated with almost unrestricted freedom, believing the ocean's depths offered refuge from enemy detection. They had been instructed that submerging meant vanishing, that the dark waters would conceal them as effectively as night cloaked a surface raider. On this spring morning in 1941, 22-year-old Werner and 48 other men aboard U-boat 557 apprehended a chilling truth. The ocean no longer concealed them. The Allied forces possessed technology capable of penetrating water itself. What none of these submariners grasped was that this singular ping signified the opening movement of a technological orchestra that would irrevocably alter submarine warfare. Over the ensuing 4 years, German U-boat crews would endure a systematic psychological dismantling as Allied sonar and detection systems evolved from rudimentary experimental apparatuses into precise hunting instruments. The principles of underwater combat were being fundamentally reshaped, not through torpedo calculations, but through sound waves that would expose the U-boat fleet to annihilation on an unprecedented scale. The decline of German submarine supremacy had commenced. The journey toward this juncture had begun 23 years prior, in the concluding months of the First World War. British and French scientists, desperate to counteract the Kaiser's submarines that had nearly forced Britain into submission through starvation, had initiated experiments with underwater sound detection. The Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Division, working in laboratories situated on land, devised the initial rudimentary sonar systems in 1918. However, the armistice arrived before these instruments could be deployed in significant numbers. Only 3 U-boats in the entirety of the Great War were credited to hydrophone detection, the technology that would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare, gestated slowly throughout the 1920s and 1930s. British scientists at His Majesty's ship Osprey, the Royal Navy's anti-submarine training establishment at Portland, refined the fundamental principles. The system they developed, named ASDIC, operated by emitting a high-frequency sound pulse through the water. When this pulse encountered a solid object, it reflected back as an echo. By measuring the interval between transmission and echo, operators could ascertain the distance to a target. By rotating the transmitter, they could determine its direction. The first operational ASDIC units were deployed in 1928 aboard British destroyers. These early iterations were primitive. The oscillator, a disc of quartz crystal that transformed electrical impulses into sound waves, had to be suspended over the vessel's side. The effective range was limited to 3,500 yards under optimal conditions. The system could not ascertain depth, only direction and distance. Operators, wearing headphones, had to differentiate genuine submarine echoes from returns bouncing off whales, schools of fish, ship wakes, and thermal layers within the water. Nevertheless, by 1939, the Royal Navy's confidence in ASDIC had become so absolute that senior Admiralty staff believed the submarine threat had been largely neutralized. Every Royal Navy destroyer was equipped with the apparatus. Training academies produced hundreds of operators. War plans presumed that convoys protected by ASDIC-equipped escorts would sustain minimal losses. This assurance would prove tragically ill-timed. September 3, 1939. Hours after Britain declared war on Germany, the passenger liner Athenia was torpedoed by U-boat 30 west of Ireland, resulting in the loss of 117 lives. The Battle of the Atlantic had begun, and German U-boat commanders promptly discovered that the vaunted British anti-submarine defenses were far less formidable than advertised. Captain Lieutenant Otto Kretschmer, Joachim Prien, and Joachim Schepke led their vessels on devastating patrols, sinking ship after ship while enduring minimal casualties. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat force, observed with satisfaction as his submarines achieved what became known as the first happy time. German submariners operated with carefully nurtured confidence in their invisibility. Submarine training emphasized that a submerged U-boat was essentially undetectable. The ocean, instructors conveyed, absorbed sound and masked movement. Hydrophones might pick up the propeller noise of a surfaced submarine, but a vessel running submerged on silent electric motors was a phantom. This doctrinal certainty permeated every echelon of U-boat operations. Feldwebel Wolfgang Herber stated, senior radio operator aboard U-boat 109, recorded in his secret diary, written in real time during patrols. We believe the enemy relied on the same listening devices from the last war. We were told their hydrophones could only detect loud machinery noise. As long as we maintained silence after diving, we thought we were safe. This conviction would soon be irrevocably shattered. The first German U-boat crew to encounter active sonar experienced not merely technological surprise, but existential shock. When an ASDIC pulse struck a submerged hull, it produced a distinct sound within the vessel. Survivors described it as dropping dried peas into a tin can, a rapid succession of metallic clicks that intensified as the hunting ship approached. Unlike the steady hum of ship propellers heard through hydrophones, the sonar ping was unmistakably artificial, undeniably directional, and terrifyingly precise. Lieutenant Herbert Werner, serving as watch officer aboard U-boat 557 during his inaugural war patrol in May 1941, underwent his baptism under sonar detection while stalking a convoy south of Greenland. His memoir, Iron Coffins, published decades later, captured the moment. The destroyer's ASDIC detected us at periscope depth. The metallic pinging grew faster, louder. Each ping struck our hull and resonated through the boat. Every man froze at his station. We knew with absolute certainty that the enemy above was aware of our exact location. The hunter had become the hunted. The metamorphosis from predator to prey occurred in mere seconds. Werner, 22 years old and barely 6 months removed from the Naval Academy, observed his commanding officer's countenance transform from confident hunter to cautious survivor. Captain Lieutenant Otto Pohlmann, a veteran of multiple successful patrols, immediately ordered a dive to 200 meters. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, yet every man comprehended the implications of the pinging. Their paramount tactical advantage, invisibility, had been eradicated by technology they scarcely understood. The ASDIC operator aboard the British destroyer pursuing them was likely a young man himself, perhaps no older than Werner. Yet, he possessed an advantage that transcended experience or skill. His equipment could penetrate the ocean itself, rendering acoustic depictions of objects hundreds of yards distant. Each ping transmitted at 14 kilohertz, far beyond the range of human hearing. When these sound waves impacted U-boat 557's steel hull, they reflected back to hydrophones mounted beneath the destroyer's keel. Simple mathematics translated time delays into distance. The submarine's bearing was revealed by the direction from which the echo originated. Every maneuver Werner's vessel executed was tracked with escalating precision. What ensued were 7 hours of depth charge assaults. U-boat 557 dove to 200 meters, rigged for silent running, and crept away at minimal velocity. The The crew heard the destroyer's propellers churning overhead, heard the splash of depth charges entering the water, and counted seconds until the detonations. Each explosion sent shockwaves through the hull. Paint chips detached from bulkheads. Light bulbs shattered. Men suffered bleeding from their ears and noses. The boat's structure groaned under the immense pressure. Inside the submarine, time progressed with agonizing lethargy. The captain ordered all non-essential systems deactivated. Electric motors operated at their absolute minimum, propelling the vessel through the water at barely 2 knots. Personnel moved in slow motion, if they moved at all. A dropped wrench, a slammed hatch, even heavy footsteps could betray their position. The crew sat or stood at their stations in near total silence, inhaling the increasingly foul air, listening to death circling above. Werner meticulously recorded every detail in his memory, details that would later fill pages of his memoir. The temperature inside the boat climbed past 35 degrees Celsius. Men stripped to their waists, their skin slick with perspiration. Condensation dripped from pipes and bulkheads. The atmosphere grew thick with the odor of unwashed bodies, diesel fuel, and dread. After 3 hours submerged, carbon dioxide levels rose to perilous heights. Men gasped for air, their lungs struggling to extract oxygen from air that had been recycled through 49 pairs of lungs dozens of times. The destroyer above them was relentless. The ASDIC operator maintained solid contact and refused to relinquish it. Every few minutes, the metallic pinging would intensify, signaling the hunter was closing in for another attack. The crew would brace themselves, gripping handrails, pressing their bodies against bulkheads. Then came the splashes, the dreadful sounds of depth charges entering the water. The crew counted 1, 2, 3, sometimes 5 charges fell in a pattern, sometimes 10. The waiting was unbearable. 7 seconds for a charge set to 100 meters, 12 seconds for 200 meters, 20 seconds for 300 meters. When the explosions occurred, the entire submarine shuddered. Charges detonated closer, lifting the vessel bodily, tossing men off their feet. The hull creaked and popped. Cork insulation rained down from overhead. Electrical sparks erupted from control panels. Leaks appeared in the pressure hull. Thin jets of seawater spraying under tremendous pressure. Damage control teams rushed to stuff wooden plugs into cracks, to tighten bolts on pipe joints, to reinforce weakened frames. After 7 hours, U-Boat 557 had descended to 280 meters, well beyond its designed crush depth of 220 meters. The hull was contracting under the pressure, rivets groaning, seams weeping. But Pohlmann knew his vessel. He knew German engineering had incorporated safety margins into its design. He also understood that ascending to shallower depths meant detection and certain destruction. Thus, he maintained the boat's deep submersion, kept it silent, and awaited the destroyer's depletion of fuel or patience. Finally, mercifully, the pinging ceased. The destroyer's propeller noise faded. Either the British captain had lost confidence in his ASDIC contact, or his fuel status compelled him to return to the convoy. U-Boat 557 waited an additional 2 hours in the depths, then slowly, cautiously, began its ascent. When the vessel finally surfaced after 9 hours submerged, men stumbled onto the conning tower and drew in deep lungfuls of clean Atlantic air. Several vomited from the sudden influx of oxygen. Others simply stood, faces turned skyward, savoring their survival. However, U-Boat 557 endured, as did thousands of other German submarines in the early years of the war. The ASDIC operators aboard Allied escorts, while capable of detecting U-boats, faced critical limitations. The system possessed a dead zone. At ranges below 200 yards, the transmitted pulse and the returning echo merged, creating a blind spot just as the attacking ship closed in for the kill. Depth charges had to be released over the stern after the submarine had been lost to detection. This afforded cunning commanders precious seconds to execute evasive maneuvers. Furthermore, ASDIC performed poorly in rough seas. Temperature layers within the water, termed thermoclines, bent sound waves and created shadow zones where submarines could conceal themselves. Experienced U-boat commanders learned to dive beneath thermal layers, where Allied sonar beams could not penetrate. They mastered the art of silent running, shutting down all non-essential machinery, moving at speeds so slow their propellers generated no cavitation. One man walking too heavily could betray a submarine's location. Throughout 1940 and 1941, these tactics enabled German submarines to maintain operational effectiveness despite Allied sonar. The learning curve favored seasoned commanders. Men like Werner, who survived their initial encounter with ASDIC detection, studied the technology's vulnerabilities. They noted that multiple escorts, each transmitting on different frequencies, generated acoustic confusion. They learned to hide within the cacophony created by a convoy itself, where the noise from 50 merchant ships' engines and propellers obscured a submarine's signature. The German Navy's own underwater detection systems differed fundamentally from Allied approaches. Rather than concentrating on active sonar, German engineers had developed sophisticated passive listening arrays. The Gruppenhorchgerät, or group listening device, standard equipment on U-boats from 1935 onwards, consisted of 48 hydrophones mounted on each side of the bow. These could detect individual ships up to 20 kilometers distant and large convoys up to 100 kilometers, although bearing accuracy was insufficient for torpedo attacks. This technological philosophy mirrored German strategic thinking. U-boats were hunters, not prey. Their objective was locating convoys, not evading detection. The Germans had developed proficient listening equipment to find targets. They presumed that adversaries would rely on comparable passive systems. The possibility that Allied vessels could actively track submerged submarines using reflected sound waves was not taken seriously in their strategic planning. Kapitänleutnant Herbert Schulze, commander of U-boat 48, noted in his patrol report from October 1940, "The British anti-submarine measures remain inadequate. Their listening devices require us to make noise. When we maintain silent running, detection is impossible." This assessment, widely shared among U-boat commanders, would prove catastrophically erroneous. The year 1942 ushered in devastating changes to the Atlantic theater of operations, although German submariners initially failed to recognize the emerging pattern. In February, Admiral Dönitz's U-boats commenced operations along the American East Coast, exploiting the United States' complete lack of preparedness for submarine warfare. The second happy time saw merchant vessels silhouetted against brightly illuminated shorelines, sailing independently without escorts, sinking by the hundreds. U-boat crews referred to it as the American shooting season, yet concurrently, British and American scientists were revolutionizing anti-submarine technology. In September 1940, Britain had transferred ASDIC technology to the United States without charge. Recognizing that only combined Allied research capabilities could develop effective countermeasures rapidly enough, American engineers at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington initiated parallel development of what they termed Sonar, an acronym for sound navigation and ranging. By early 1942, coordinated British-American research programs were yielding swift breakthroughs. This technological transfer represented an extraordinary act of wartime collaboration. British scientists arrived in Washington bearing complete blueprints, operational manuals, and even actual ASDIC equipment salvaged from Royal Navy destroyers. American engineers meticulously studied every detail, then applied American industrial methodologies to enhance production and performance. The British utilized quartz crystal transducers, assembled manually in limited quantities. Americans developed magnetostrictive transducers, employing nickel tubes that could be mass-produced. British ASDIC employed streamlined protective domes. Americans experimented with spherical domes that offered superior acoustic properties. The collaboration extended beyond hardware. Royal Navy officers shared years of operational experience, instructing American anti-submarine warfare students in all they had learned regarding ASDIC's strengths and weaknesses. They explained how temperature layers influenced sonar beams, how submarine commanders exploited blind spots, and how experienced operators differentiated submarine echoes from false returns. This transfer of knowledge compressed years of learning into months, enabling American forces to deploy effective anti-submarine capabilities far more rapidly than if they had developed the technology independently. By mid-1942, American shipyards were installing sonar equipment on every destroyer, destroyer escort, and corvette rolling off production lines. The United States Maritime Commission, coordinating this immense undertaking, ensured standardization across all equipment. This meant parts could be interchanged between vessels, operators could be transferred between ships without retraining, and tactical doctrine could be uniform across the entire anti-submarine force. The industrial scale of American production transformed sonar from a specialized British naval technology into a pervasive Allied anti-submarine weapon. Three critical advancements transformed Allied sonar from a useful yet limited instrument into a deadly submarine killer. Firstly, powered rotation systems enabled ASDIC heads to scan through wider arcs more swiftly, diminishing the time frame within which submarines could evade a searching escort. Manual rotation, requiring operators to turn hand cranks, was superseded by electric motors capable of sweeping through 90 degrees in seconds. This meant escorts could survey their entire forward arc, from port to starboard, in the time previously required to scan a narrow sector of the ocean. Secondly, streamlined steel domes replaced canvas covers, allowing escorts to maintain effective search speeds of up to 20 knots instead of being restricted to 15. The canvas domes employed in early ASDIC installations generated turbulent water flow at high speeds, producing noise that masked returning echoes. Steel domes, shaped through wind tunnel testing and hydrodynamic analysis, permitted water to flow smoothly past the transducer even at attack speeds. Consequently, escorts could close on submarines rapidly without losing sonar contact. Thirdly, dual-frequency systems operating at both 14 and 30 kilocycles dramatically improved range and resolution. Low-frequency transmissions traveled farther through water but provided imprecise bearing information. High-frequency pulses yielded sharp, detailed echoes but were rapidly absorbed by seawater. By combining both frequencies, operators could detect submarines at maximum range using low frequency, then switch to high frequency for precise targeting as the range diminished. Some advanced systems alternated frequencies automatically, providing operators the benefits of both within a single sweep. Most revolutionary of all was the Type 147 ASDIC set, developed in 1943, which could track submarines in 3 dimensions. This system provided not only bearing and range, but also depth. For the first time, Allied escorts could ascertain with precision the exact location of a submarine within 3-dimensional oceanic space. Depth charge patterns could be set with devastating accuracy. The underwater sanctuary was vanishing. German U-boat crews began experiencing these improvements as an inexplicable increase in detection rates. Oberleutnant Werner, promoted to first watch officer aboard U-boat 230 in late 1942, recorded the shift. In 1941, if we dove deep and maintained silence, escorts usually lost us within an hour. By 1943, they held contact for 5, 6, 7 hours. They always seemed to know our depth. Charges exploded at precisely our depth. It was as if they could see us. Werner's observation reflected a technological reality that German naval intelligence was slow to comprehend. The Allies had not merely enhanced their sonar equipment, they had revolutionized it. The Type 147 ASDIC could track submarines in 3 dimensions simultaneously. German U-boat tactics, developed against earlier 2-dimensional systems, were suddenly rendered obsolete. Diving deep no longer provided safety. Changing course no longer broke contact. Silent running no longer guaranteed invisibility. The psychological impact of persistent sonar contact was profound. In contrast to surface engagements, where naval personnel could at least confront their adversaries, those aboard submarines under assault faced a passive ordeal, confined to awaiting their fate as destroyers relentlessly pursued them. The incessant rhythmic pulse of sonar striking the hull transformed into a death knell. Sailors understood that each ping signified an escort vessel meticulously pinpointing their location. It meant depth charges were being meticulously calibrated to their precise depth, and that obliteration could descend within mere seconds, heralded by nothing more than the sound of ordnance entering the water above. The auditory sensation itself was profoundly disorienting. Seasoned veterans recounted it as akin to a fingernail scraping across slate, amplified 1,000-fold and reverberating through the steel structure. This sound permeated every section of the submersible. Those in the forward torpedo compartment perceived it with the same clarity as individuals in the engine spaces aft. There was no refuge, no means of blocking it out. Some men would stuff cotton into their ears, but the vibration coursed through the hull itself, through the deck plates, through the very air. It was inescapable, perpetual, and unforgiving. What truly amplified the terror of the pinging was its implication. Every submariner grasped fundamental physics. Sound travels through water at approximately 1,500 meters per second. If an ASDIC operator registered an echo 2 seconds after transmitting, the submarine was located 1,500 meters away. Simple division yielded the range. The direction from which the echo returned indicated the bearing. And in 1943, with the introduction of the advanced 3-dimensional ASDIC system, the angle of sound wave reflection revealed depth. The submarine possessed no avenue of escape. Every facet of its position was known to the hunters overhead. Feldwebel Herbert Steffens, whose U-boat survived numerous depth-charge bombardments throughout 1942 and early 1943, conveyed the dread in his journal. The sonar pulses never cease. They follow us relentlessly, hour after hour. We maintain darkness to conserve energy. The atmosphere becomes stifling. Carbon dioxide levels escalate. Men struggle for breath. Yet, the pinging persists. We know they are above, circling, waiting. When the splashes commence, we tally them. 1, 2, 5, 10 depth charges. Then, we await the detonations, questioning if this sequence will be the one that breaches our hull, unleashing the sea upon us. Steffens's journal entries from early 1943 detailed the psychological degradation of U-boat crews. Individuals who had exhibited unwavering resolve months prior were now becoming psychologically shattered survivors. Following particularly violent depth charge assaults, sailors would tremble uncontrollably for extended periods. Some lost their appetite, their stomachs seized by anxiety. Others sought refuge in sleep whenever possible, craving oblivion. A few succumbed entirely, weeping uncontrollably or becoming completely unresponsive. The captains endeavored to sustain morale through routine and strict adherence to discipline. Daily drills continued. Equipment underwent meticulous maintenance. Watches were diligently kept. However, everyone understood the grim reality. The ocean no longer served as their protector. The very technology that had elevated submarines to the status of the most formidable weapons in the preceding conflict had been neutralized by innovative advancements that rendered them vulnerable targets. The equilibrium had irrevocably shifted. and neither German ingenuity nor German fortitude could restore it. The spring of 1943 witnessed the pivotal culmination of the Battle of the Atlantic. In March, German U-boats dispatched 120 merchant vessels, representing nearly 700,000 tons, while sustaining the loss of only 12 submarines. Almost two-thirds of these sinkings occurred while the cargo ships were part of a convoy system, the very cornerstone of Allied maritime defense. For 20 consecutive days in March, Admiral Dönitz's wolf packs came closer to severing Britain's vital Atlantic supply line than at any other juncture in the war. The official history of the Royal Navy later affirmed that the Germans never approached so near to disrupting the vital communications between the Old World and the New. However, March 1943 marked the zenith of U-boat effectiveness, not the dawn of a sustained period of dominance. The technological and tactical balance was undergoing a decisive transformation. Allied shipyards, particularly those in the United States, were constructing escort vessels at a pace that outstripped their destruction. Destroyer escorts, corvettes, and frigates, all equipped with superior sonar systems, began to flood the Atlantic in unprecedented numbers. Very long-range Liberator aircraft, armed with both radar and sonobuoys, effectively closed the mid-Atlantic aerial void, an area where U-boats had previously operated beyond the reach of land-based aircraft. May 1943 became known as Black May for the U-boat arm. 41 U-boats were annihilated, representing 25% of the operational fleet. On May 24th, Admiral Dönitz, profoundly dismayed by these catastrophic losses, ordered the temporary withdrawal of U-boats from the North Atlantic. In his war diary, he inscribed, "We confront a situation where the enemy's efforts to curtail our operations have succeeded. Their sea and air anti-submarine forces have grown immeasurably. Our losses have become unsustainable." The statistics painted a grim picture. During the initial 3 weeks of May, 96 U-boats were deployed in the North Atlantic. 41 were destroyed. 43% never returned to port. For comparative purposes, the entire year of 1941 had seen 35 U-boat losses from all causes. Black May accounted for more submarine losses in 3 weeks than an entire year of early war operations. The attrition rate had become devastating. 12 merchant ships were sunk for every U-boat lost. 2 years prior, the ratio had been 10 merchant ships per U-boat per patrol, with the majority of boats returning safely. Now, submarines were being eliminated at a faster rate than they could sink enemy targets. Individual U-boat losses illuminated the human tragedy underpinning these figures. U-463, commanded by Kapitän Leutnant Lothar Leo Wolfbauer, was detected by ASDIC on May 5th while shadowing convoy ONS-5. The destroyer Vidette established a solid contact and maintained it despite the U-boat's evasive maneuvers. For 3 agonizing hours, Wolfbauer employed every tactic within the German tactical manual, diving deep, altering course frequently, varying speed, and deploying bubble decoys. None proved effective. The ASDIC contact remained unwavering. Finally, with their batteries nearly depleted and the vessel sustaining damage from near-miss depth charges, Wolfbauer surfaced to engage with his deck gun. Vidette's 4-inch guns annihilated the submarine within minutes. 46 men perished, and 3 survived. U-192, under the command of Oberleutnant zur See Erich Weiher, was pursued for 6 hours by escorts from convoy SC-129 on May 6th. The boat submerged to 300 meters, far exceeding its design limitations. The hull groaned and creaked under the immense pressure. Leaks appeared in numerous locations. Nevertheless, the sonar pulses located them. The escorts overhead coordinated flawlessly, one maintaining ASDIC contact while others positioned themselves for depth charge runs. When the attacks commenced, they were precisely aimed. Charges detonated at exactly 300 meters depth. The submarine's pressure hull fractured. Seawater surged inward. Only 8 men managed to escape the sinking vessel. 44 drowned. U-531, a new boat on its inaugural patrol, was detected on May 6th by an RAF Liberator equipped with airborne radar. The aircraft surprised the submarine on the surface at night, a time when U-boat commanders had previously felt secure. The Liberator's searchlight illuminated the vessel from half a mile away. Depth charges were released before the crew could submerge. The submarine sustained damage but remained afloat. Escorts homed in on the radar contact, established ASDIC contact, and completed the kill with a coordinated attack. There were no survivors. U-194, U-125, U-438, U-657, U-273. The list grew longer each day. Some boats were destroyed by aircraft. Others succumbed to surface escorts. Many were hunted by combined air and surface forces operating in perfect concert, but nearly all were initially detected by radar or sonar. The technological advantage had shifted so profoundly that German submarines could scarcely operate. For German submarine crews still at sea during Black May, the psychological toll was devastating. Radio messages brought tidings of vessel after vessel failing to return. Friends and comrades vanished beneath the waves. The ocean, once a German hunting ground, had transformed into a killing field where U-boats were the prey, and always, incessantly, there was the pinging. The sonar pulses that revealed submarines left them with nowhere to conceal themselves. U-boat command attempted to preserve operational efficacy through denial. Directives from Berlin insisted that losses were merely temporary setbacks. New tactics were transmitted to vessels at sea. Commanders were instructed to persevere, that the tide would inevitably turn. However, the men within the submarines understood the truth more intimately. They had endured the relentless ASDIC tracking. They had survived depth charge assaults that appeared to target their precise coordinates. They had witnessed comrades perish as hulls buckled under precisely placed explosions. No amount of propaganda could erase these harrowing experiences. Oberleutnant zur See Werner Hauff, by then commanding his own vessel, U-415, experienced this new reality firsthand. In his memoir, he recounted a patrol in April 1943. We were detected within hours of reaching our operational zone. For 3 days, escorts hunted us unremittingly. Their sonar never lost contact. We dove to our maximum depth of 300 meters. The hull groaned. Rivets popped. Still, the pinging found us. When we attempted to escape on the surface at night, aircraft materialized with searchlights. Sanctuary had vanished entirely. We had become targets in a shooting gallery. Hoff's patrol aboard U-415 proved to be one of his shortest and most harrowing. The vessel departed La Palisse on April 10, 1944. Assigned to patrol the western approaches to the English Channel, Hoff recognized the mission's near-suicidal nature. Allied air and sea patrols had rendered the Bay of Biscay crossing a veritable nightmare. Submarines could no longer surface with impunity, not even under the cover of darkness. The novel snorkel breathing apparatus permitted diesel engine operation while submerged, thus eliminating the necessity for surfacing to recharge batteries. Vessels could, in theory, remain submerged for their entire patrols. However, Allied radar quickly adapted, detecting even this diminutive protrusion above the waves, and submerged U-boats, whether snorkeling or operating on batteries, remained susceptible to increasingly sophisticated sonar. The snorkel itself was a Dutch innovation, captured when Germany occupied the Netherlands in 1940. The original Dutch design was straightforward, a tube extending above the water's surface to supply air to the diesel engines while the submarine maintained periscope depth. German engineers refined the concept, incorporating automatic valves that sealed the tube when waves washed over it, preventing any ingress of water. We were detected within hours of reaching our operational area. For 3 days, escorts hunted us relentlessly. Their sonar never lost contact. We dove to maximum depth 300 meters. The hull groaned. Rivets popped. Still, the pinging found us. When we tried to escape on the surface at night, aircraft appeared with searchlights. There was no sanctuary left. We had become targets in a shooting gallery. Hoff's patrol aboard U-415 would be among his shortest and most harrowing. The boat departed La Palisse on April 10, 1944, assigned to patrol the western approaches to the English Channel. Hoff knew the mission was nearly suicidal. Allied air and sea patrols had made the Bay of Biscay crossing a nightmare. Submarines could no longer surface safely, even at night. The new snorkel-breathing tube allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while submerged, but Allied radar could detect even this small protrusion above the waves. U-415 made it through the Bay of Biscay by remaining submerged for 18 hours at a stretch. When the boat finally reached open Atlantic waters on April 15th, Hoff surfaced briefly to recharge batteries fully. Within 20 minutes, an RAF Liberator appeared on the horizon. The aircraft had detected U-415's radar emissions before Hoff's lookouts had spotted the plane. The submarine crash-dived with seconds to spare. Depth charges fell astern, damaging the stern torpedo tube, but leaving the boat operational. For the next 60 hours, U-415 remained submerged, running on electric motors, creeping away from the patrol area at 3 knots. Hoff knew that Allied hunter-killer groups coordinated their searches. An aircraft detection would bring surface escorts racing to the area. Sure enough, on April 18th, ASDIC pings began, echoing through the hull. An escort had picked up their trail. Hoff dove deeper to 250 meters and slowed to silent running speed. The pinging continued. The escort above them had solid contact and maintained it hour after hour. Hoff tried every evasive technique. He altered course 90 degrees. The pinging followed. He increased speed briefly, then slowed again, hoping to confuse the ASDIC operator. The pinging intensified, indicating the escort was closing. He released a pillow and wobble-bubble decoy. The pinging never wavered. The Allied operator was experienced enough to distinguish genuine submarine echoes from decoys. After 8 hours of continuous contact, depth charges began to fall. The patterns were frighteningly accurate. Explosions occurred at precisely 250 meters depth, exactly where U-415 was running. Hoff took the boat deeper still to 300 meters. Paint peeled from bulkheads under the pressure. The hull groaned continuously. Men stood rigid at their stations, faces white with fear. The attack continued through the night and into the next morning. Hoff's crew was exhausted. The boat's batteries nearly depleted. Air quality dangerously poor. He faced an impossible choice. Surface and fight, certainly dying under the escort's guns, or remain submerged until batteries died, then surface and surrender, or try to outlast the hunter, hoping he would run low on fuel or depth charges. Hoff chose to wait. For 16 hours, U-415 crept through the depths while death circled overhead. Finally, the pinging stopped. The escort had expended all depth charges and departed. Hoff waited 4 more hours, then surfaced to find empty ocean. The boat limped back toward France. Mission aborted. Crew traumatized. U-415 never made another war patrol. She was sunk in her bunker at Toulon by Allied air attack in July 1944. Hoff survived only because he was ashore when the bombs fell. The technological gap was widening. By mid-1943, Allied escorts carried not just improved sonar, but an entire anti-submarine warfare system. High-frequency direction finding, called Huff-Duff by operators, could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions. Radar could detect surfaced submarines at night or in fog. Sonobuoys dropped from aircraft created underwater listening networks that monitored vast areas. Ahead-throwing weapons like Hedgehog and Squid projected depth charge patterns forward while maintaining sonar contact, eliminating the dead zone that had previously allowed submarines to escape. The integration of these systems created a detection network that was greater than the sum of its parts. A typical convoy in mid-1943 was protected by 6 to 8 escorts, each carrying ASDIC, radar, and Huff-Duff. Aircraft from Iceland, Britain, or escort carriers provided air cover. The mid-Atlantic gap, where U-boats had previously operated beyond aircraft range, had been closed by very long-range liberators flying from Newfoundland and Northern Ireland. Every square mile of ocean the convoy traversed was monitored by multiple overlapping sensor systems. When a U-boat approached such a convoy, detection was nearly inevitable. If the boat transmitted radio signals to coordinate with other submarines, Huff-Duff triangulated its position and escorts raced to the area. If it surfaced at night to shadow the convoy, radar detected it and aircraft attacked. If it submerged to approach underwater, ASDIC picked up the target. The submarine had essentially 3 choices, all bad: remain distant and unable to attack, close on the surface and be destroyed by aircraft, close submerged and be destroyed by escorts. The Hedgehog weapon system revolutionized anti-submarine attacks. Earlier depth charge attacks required escorts to pass over a submarine, dropping charges astern and losing ASDIC contact in the final moments of the attack. Hedgehog fired 24 small bombs forward in an elliptical pattern while the escort maintained ASDIC contact throughout the attack. Each bomb contained 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, armed by contact with a hard surface. If all 24 bombs missed, they sank to the bottom without exploding, and the escort could immediately fire another pattern. If even one bomb struck the submarine's hull, the explosion would detonate adjacent bombs, creating a devastating blast that could crack pressure hulls. German submarine commanders quickly learned to fear Hedgehog attacks. Unlike conventional depth charges, which exploded whether they hit anything or not, Hedgehog gave instant feedback. Silence meant a miss, explosions meant a hit, and hits were usually fatal. The psychological impact was significant. Depth charge attacks, while terrifying, could be survived even when charges exploded nearby. Hedgehog hits were almost always lethal. The Squid system, introduced in late 1943, was even more lethal. 3 large mortars fired patterns of 3 depth charges, 250 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike Hedgehog, Squid charges were set to explode at specific depths calculated by an automatic computer that processed ASDIC data. The system compensated for submarine evasive maneuvers, predicting where the target would be when charges reached preset depth. Squid-equipped frigates achieved a kill rate of 25% per attack, compared to less than 5% for conventional depth charge attacks. German countermeasures proved woefully inadequate. The Pillenwerfer, a chemical device that created bubble streams to decoy sonar, fooled only inexperienced operators. Veteran ASDIC operators quickly learned to distinguish the chaotic echo signature of bubbles from the solid return of a steel hull. After a few seconds, experienced operators could ignore Pillenwerfer decoys completely. Bold, officially designated Cobalt, was a more sophisticated decoy. This 1-meter balloon coated with aluminum strips and filled with calcium hydride rose slowly from deep water. When it reached shallower depths, seawater reacted with the calcium hydride to produce hydrogen gas, keeping the balloon neutrally buoyant. To radar, it appeared to be a submarine snorkel. To ASDIC, it produced a valid echo, but Bold had severe limitations. It could only be deployed from stationary submarines. It rose too slowly to protect a submarine during evasive maneuvers, and it didn't move horizontally. so any ASDIC operator who maintained contact for more than a few minutes would realize the target wasn't actually a submarine. Absorbent hull coatings to reduce sonar reflection were researched extensively but never successfully deployed. The Germans called it Alberic, after the dwarf in Wagner's opera who possessed a cloak of invisibility. The concept was sound. A rubber coating mixed with air bubbles would absorb incoming sonar pulses rather than reflecting them. Laboratory tests showed promise, but practical application proved impossible. The coating had to be several centimeters thick to be effective. It added tremendous weight. It degraded rapidly in seawater. Most critically, it couldn't withstand the pressure changes of deep diving. The coating would compress at depth, losing its sound-absorbing properties, then expand irregularly when the submarine surfaced, creating gaps and tears. After months of research and testing on captured U-boats, the Allies concluded Alberic was ineffective. German scientists, working with even fewer resources, came to the same conclusion. The fundamental problem was that German engineers had spent 20 years developing pro-submarine technology, improving U-boat ability to find targets while largely ignoring anti-submarine defenses. When Allied detection systems matured, Germany had no effective response. The Kriegsmarine had assumed incorrectly that future naval warfare would resemble past patterns. They had prepared to fight the last war, while the Allies had developed technologies for an entirely new kind of warfare. The human cost mounted with horrifying speed. In September 1942, 3,000 U-boat men were at sea in operational boats. By August 1944, 28,000 of the 40,000 men who had served in the U-boat force were dead. The survival rate for submarine crews fell below 30%. Every patrol became a near-certain death sentence. Yet, the Kriegsmarine continued sending boats out, even as green crews replaced the experienced commanders who had carried the early war's success. Feldwebel Steffens transferred to the larger type Ein D2 submarine U-234 in early 1944, writing of the psychological breakdown among crews. The new men are terrified before we even leave port. They have heard the statistics. They know 3 boats out of 4 never return. When the sonar pings begin, some men weep. Others simply shut down mentally, staring at bulkheads, unable to function. The veterans try to maintain discipline, but we know the truth as well as the novices. We are sailing in iron coffins. The advent of snorkel technology in mid-1944 offered brief hope. This extendable breathing tube allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while remaining submerged, eliminating the need to surface for battery recharging. Boats could theoretically stay underwater for entire patrols. But Allied radar quickly adapted, detecting even the small snorkel head above water, and submerged U-boats, whether snorkeling or running on batteries, remained vulnerable to increasingly sophisticated sonar. The snorkel itself was Dutch technology captured when Germany occupied the Netherlands in 1940. The original Dutch design was simple, a tube extending above the water surface to provide air to diesel engines while the submarine ran at periscope depth. German engineers refined the concept, adding automatic valves that sealed the tube when waves washed over it, preventing flooding. They also fitted exhaust apparatuses that discharged diesel exhaust underwater, thereby eradicating the telltale smoke plume that had previously rendered surfaced submarines detectable from vast distances. In practical application, snorkel operations proved to be a deeply unpleasant experience. The submarine was compelled to maintain exceedingly precise depth control, ensuring the snorkel head remained just above the water surface. If it descended too far, the automated valve would seal shut, forcing the diesel engines to draw air from within the vessel's interior. Crew members endured agonizing ear discomfort as the internal pressure plummeted unexpectedly. Conversely, if the snorkel was too high, the conning tower risked breaching the surface, exposing the boat to detection by aircraft and surface radar. Turbulent seas rendered accurate depth management almost impossible. Waves would continuously wash over the snorkel head, causing the valve to repeatedly open and close. Each closure induced painful pressure fluctuations inside the boat. The cacophony was overwhelming. Diesel engines operating at maximum output within a submerged submarine generated a deafening din that rendered ordinary communication impossible. Men resorted to shouting to be heard above the thunderous roar. The ceaseless vibrations rattled every fixture, making sleep an impossibility. Despite the meticulous efforts of German engineers, exhaust fumes inevitably infiltrated the boat, inflicting headaches and nausea upon everyone aboard. After 12 hours of snorkeling, crews emerged utterly exhausted, physically unwell, and with their hearing severely impaired. Most critically, snorkeling did not confer the cloak of invisibility that German submariners had desperately hoped for. Allied radar operators progressively refined their ability to pinpoint snorkel heads with growing accuracy. Though the small radar signature presented a challenge, aircraft equipped with specialized radar could indeed detect reflections from the snorkel tube, particularly in tranquil seas. These aircraft would then launch attacks using depth charges or guided torpedoes, compelling the submarine to dive deep and abruptly curtailing its battery recharging period. On occasion, submarines were ambushed by surface escorts while snorkeling, detected either by the acoustic signature of their running diesel engines or by the wake churned up by the snorkel tube cleaving the water. Allied operators had become remarkably adept at differentiating genuine submarine contacts from spurious echoes. Their training programs produced thousands of highly skilled sonar operators capable of identifying target characteristics, estimating submarine types from their echo signatures, tracking evasive maneuvers, and directing weaponry with deadly precision. This synergy of enhanced equipment and experienced personnel forged a detection network that German submarines were simply incapable of evading. British and American training establishments had standardized instruction in the use of ASDIC, a form of sonar. New operators would spend weeks in classrooms absorbing acoustic theory, studying the principles of sound propagation through water, investigating the effects of temperature and salinity on sonar beams, and analyzing how submarine hulls reflected sound waves. They meticulously studied recordings of actual submarine echoes, honing their ability to distinguish submarines from whales, shipwrecks, shoals of fish, and thermal layers. These trainees practiced extensively on simulators that recreated tactical hunting scenarios, thereby developing the immediate recognition skills essential for combat. By 1944, Allied navies were graduating ASDIC operators, whose proficiency far surpassed that of the pioneering operators from the early war years, who had devised these tactics through arduous trial and error. These highly trained operators approached their work with immense professional pride. They engaged in fierce competition to achieve the quickest detection times, the longest periods of target tracking, and the highest success rates in engagements. The Royal Navy published monthly rankings of ASDIC teams based on their performance metrics. The most skilled operators were rewarded with promotions and commendations. Their exceptional expertise became the stuff of legend. Stories circulated of operators who could discern specific submarine models from subtle variations in echo patterns, who could track evasive submarines through thermal layers, and who never lost contact once it had been established. By D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won. On the very day of the invasion, not a single Allied vessel was lost to U-boats during the immense Normandy landings, despite desperate German attempts to disrupt the cross-channel traffic. The sonar screen maintained by Allied escorts was so comprehensive that any U-boat attempting to approach the invasion fleet on that 6th of June was immediately detected and either driven off or destroyed before it could launch its torpedoes. Although U-boats would manage to sink some ships in the days and weeks following the initial landings, The immediate invasion force successfully traversed the English Channel, unmolested by submarine attacks. Admiral Dönitz had ordered every available U-boat to attack the invasion fleet. 36 submarines were deployed to the English Channel and its western approaches. The mission was recognized as suicidal, and this was understood by all involved. The channel itself was shallow, severely restricting submarine maneuverability. Allied air superiority was absolute, with hundreds of aircraft constantly patrolling the skies. Surface escorts numbered in the hundreds, creating overlapping sonar coverage that left no gaps for submarines to exploit. Nevertheless, the order stood: attack the invasion fleet regardless of the cost. U-boats equipped with snorkels fared marginally better than those without. U-84, commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Helmut Heinz, managed to penetrate close enough to the invasion beaches to launch torpedoes at landing craft on the 8th of June. The boat survived the attack and managed to withdraw, though relentless ASDIC tracking and depth charge attacks left it severely damaged. U-984 was one of only 3 boats that successfully attacked invasion shipping and managed to survive to recount its experiences. The majority of boats were not so fortunate. U-55 was detected by ASDIC on the 9th of June while attempting to approach the invasion fleet. The frigate HMS Halstead established contact and maintained it for 11 hours. The submarine dived deep, proceeding on silent running, but the Type 147 ASDIC system tracked it perfectly in 3 dimensions. When Halstead's supply of depth charges dwindled, the frigate requested assistance, and the destroyer HMS Eskimo took over the pursuit, attacking with Squid mortars. The second pattern of Squid struck U-55 amidships, cracking its pressure hull. The submarine sank with all 48 crew members. U-821 was hunted for 14 hours by multiple escorts on the 10th of June. The boat employed every evasive tactic available, diving to 300 meters, releasing decoy devices, and making erratic course changes. None of these efforts were successful. The ASDIC contact remained solid. Finally, with its batteries nearly depleted and the air inside becoming almost unbreathable, Kapitänleutnant Ulrich Neufeld surfaced his boat to surrender. Allied vessels rescued 37 survivors. 12 men had perished during the depth charge attacks. This relentless slaughter continued throughout June and July. Of the 36 U-boats committed to attacking the invasion, 25 were destroyed, representing a catastrophic 69% loss rate within 2 months. The surviving submarines limped back to French ports, battered, traumatized, and their missions utter failures. Not a single troop transport ship, not one major warship, had been sunk. A few landing craft and smaller vessels had been hit, but at the immense cost of hundreds of German submariners' lives and dozens of irreplaceable submarines. The seabed off the coast of Normandy became strewn with the wrecks of German submarines. Allied forces conducting post-war surveys would document 17 U-boat hulls in the invasion area, most exhibiting clear evidence of catastrophic depth charge damage. These wrecks served as submerged memorials to the utter futility of deploying submarines against an adversary possessing total sonar and radar superiority. The introduction of the Type 21 Electro boat in the war's concluding months represented German engineering's final, desperate gambit to regain underwater dominance. These revolutionary submarines featured streamlined hulls, immense battery capacity, enabling sustained submerged speeds of 17 knots, and advanced acoustic silencing technology. Had they been available in substantial numbers in 1943, they might well have altered the trajectory of the battle. However, only 2 Type 21 boats completed combat patrols before Germany's eventual surrender. This was far too few and far too late to exert any meaningful impact. The Type 21 signified a radical departure from conventional submarine design. Earlier U-boats were essentially surface vessels capable of temporary submersion. The Type 21, conversely, was conceived to operate primarily underwater, surfacing only when absolutely indispensable. Its hull was sculpted into a torpedo-like streamlined shape, eliminating the deck gun, external torpedo storage, and other protuberances that generated drag. This hydrodynamic configuration, coupled with a battery capacity triple that of conventional boats, facilitated sustained underwater speeds that could outpace most surface escorts. The specifications were indeed impressive. A submerged speed of 17 knots could be maintained for 90 minutes. A cruising speed of 6 knots could be sustained for 3 days without surfacing. The boat was capable of diving to depths of 280 meters, significantly deeper than Allied depth charges were typically set. Perhaps the most groundbreaking innovation was the hydraulic torpedo reloading system. The Type 21 could discharge all 6 bow torpedoes, then reload and fire again in less than 20 minutes, all while remaining at action stations. German engineers had also directly addressed the challenge of sonar detection. The Type 21's hull was clad in synthetic rubber tiles engineered to absorb ASDIC pulses. Its propellers were specially designed to minimize cavitation noise. Machinery was mounted on rubber isolators to dampen vibration transmission through the hull. The snorkel system was enhanced with improved valves and more efficient airflow. In theory, the Type 21 was intended to be substantially more challenging to detect and track than conventional U-boats. Production commenced in late 1943, employing prefabrication techniques adopted from American shipbuilding practices. Submarines were assembled from 8 distinct sections, each constructed in different factories across Germany, and then transported to assembly yards for final construction. This modular construction approach facilitated rapid production. 118 Type 21 boats were completed before the war's end, with 4 achieving combat readiness. However, the program was plagued by numerous issues stemming from its rushed development and dispersed manufacturing. Quality control suffered considerably. Sections fabricated in disparate factories often failed to align correctly. Welds fractured under pressure. Electrical systems malfunctioned. The hydraulic torpedo system developed leaks. Most critically, the rubber coating designed to defeat sonar proved to be unreliable. It degraded in seawater, peeled away during deep dives, and in certain conditions actually increased rather than decreased the submarine's acoustic signature. U-2511, commanded by Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, undertook the only genuine Type 21 combat patrol. The boat departed from Bergen, Norway on April 30, 1945, mere days before Germany's surrender. Schnee's orders were to demonstrate the new submarine's capabilities by penetrating Allied patrol lines and reaching the North Atlantic. For a period of 2 weeks, U-2511 operated off the British Isles, successfully evading numerous Allied anti-submarine forces. Schnee identified several potential targets, but refrained from engaging, adhering to his orders to avoid combat unless circumstances were absolutely ideal. The patrol served to highlight both the Type 21's considerable potential and its inherent limitations. The submarine could indeed outrun escorts once detected. Its underwater endurance was remarkable, yet it remained vulnerable to ASDIC detection. Allied operators adapted with speed to the new acoustic signature. On multiple occasions, escorts established solid contacts and initiated hunts for U-2511. Only the boat's superior underwater speed allowed it to escape. Schnee's patrol report, filed after Germany's surrender, concluded that while the Type 21 represented a significant advancement over conventional U-boats, it was not rendered invisible to Allied sonar. Given sufficient time, Allied forces would undoubtedly have devised tactics and technologies to counter it. U-3008, the sole other Type 21 to complete a combat patrol, had an even less distinguished record. The boat departed Kiel on May 1, 1945, tasked with the evacuation of German personnel from Norway. It surrendered to Allied forces on May 9th without firing a single shot. Post-war inspections conducted by British and American naval experts revealed the pervasive quality control deficiencies that had plagued the program. The rubber coating was peeling in numerous locations. Hydraulic systems exhibited leaks. Electrical connections were corroded. The boat was operationally capable, but it fell far short of the revolutionary weapon that German propaganda had promised. For the German submarine crews who survived the war, the haunting memory of sonar detection remained their most persistent nightmare. In post-war interviews and memoirs, veterans consistently alluded to the unnerving sound of ASDIC pings striking their hulls. That metallic ringing, which intensified as escorts closed in, had signaled their transformation from predators to prey. It had marked the demise of U-boat invincibility and the commencement of their systematic destruction. Herbert Werner, one of only 3 U-boat commanders whose vessels survived the war, still operational, immigrated to the United States in 1957 and subsequently became an American citizen. In 1969, he published Iron Coffins, his seminal memoir of submarine warfare. The book's dedication read, "To my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea." In its pages, he candidly acknowledged a truth that had taken him years to fully accept. We were defeated not primarily by superior courage or numbers, though both played roles, but by technology we did not understand and could not counter. The Allies learned to see through water. We never developed effective means to hide. Werner's transition from defeated adversary to American citizen mirrored his own wartime experiences. Following Germany's surrender, he spent 2 years in British prisoner of war camps, serving as an interpreter and liaison between Allied authorities and German naval personnel. His fluent English and cooperative demeanor facilitated his early release in 1947. He briefly returned to Germany, but found a nation shattered, both physically and psychologically. The submarine service he had known was gone. The naval bases lay in ruins. The bunkers were filled with scuttled vessels. Most of his comrades were deceased. In 1952, Werner immigrated to the United States on a technical visa, sponsored by a marine engineering firm that recognized the value of his submarine expertise. He settled in Connecticut, working as a consultant in sonar and underwater acoustics. The profound irony was not lost on him. He was now contributing to the enhancement of the very technology that had vanquished Germany's U-boats. In 1957, he officially became an American citizen, swearing an oath of allegiance to the nation whose sonar had relentlessly hunted him through the Atlantic depths. The act of writing Iron Coffins became Werner's means of processing his trauma and honoring the fallen. He dedicated 6 years to meticulous research, interviewing survivors, and consulting war diaries and patrol reports. The book, published when Werner was 49 years old, quickly became a bestseller. American readers were captivated by this first-hand account of submarine warfare from the perspective of the enemy. German readers, particularly veterans, embraced it as an honest testament to their experiences. In contrast to much German war literature that tended to romanticize or justify service under the Nazi regime, Werner's memoir acknowledged the futility and horror of the U-boat war's final years. The book's reception was not universally positive. Some German veterans accused Werner of exaggerating Allied technological superiority as an excuse for Germany's defeat. A few American critics suggested he had inflated his own accomplishments and downplayed German war crimes. Naval historians debated specific details and disputed statistics, but the core narrative, the story of German submariners encountering Allied sonar technology they could not overcome, was broadly accepted as fundamentally accurate. Werner continued his career as a marine consultant until his retirement in 1985. He occasionally delivered lectures at the Naval War College and the Submarine School, sharing his experiences with American naval officers. He participated in several historical conferences and documentaries focused on the Battle of the Atlantic. In his later years, he became a vocal advocate for German-American reconciliation, speaking at veteran organizations and schools about the senselessness of war and the imperative of international cooperation. The statistics paint a stark and grim picture. Of the approximately 1,160 U-boats commissioned during World War II, 785 were lost. 30,000 submariners perished, resulting in a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service during the war. The majority of these devastating losses occurred after May 1943, following the maturation of Allied sonar systems. In the final 18 months of the war, dispatching a U-boat on patrol was tantamount to sentencing its crew to death. Wolfgang Herschel, a radio operator who had served on U-109 through the early years of the conflict, survived the war aboard U-234, which surrendered in May 1945. In the final entry of his diary, he wrote, "We who sailed beneath the waves believed ourselves to be invisible warriors. The enemy taught us that invisibility was an illusion. Their sonar stripped away our sanctuary. In the end, we were simply men trapped in steel tubes, waiting for the pinging to find us. It always did." Herschel's survival was, in itself, remarkable. U-234 departed Kiel on its final patrol in April 1945, carrying a highly secret cargo destined for Japan. The boat was laden with advanced weaponry, technical blueprints, classified documents, samples of uranium oxide, and 2 Japanese naval officers. The mission's objective was to exchange German technological advancements for Japanese raw materials, particularly rubber and rare metals. However, Germany surrendered before the submarine could reach its destination. Kapitänleutnant Jürgen Heiner, Feller, commanding U-234, faced an insurmountable choice: surrender to the Americans, continue the perilous journey to Japan, or scuttle the vessel. Feller opted for surrender, but not before taking the crucial step of destroying the uranium samples and classified documents. On May 19th, U-234 surfaced off the coast of New Hampshire and transmitted its intention to surrender to the United States Navy. The destroyer USS Sutton escorted the submarine to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Herschel and the rest of the crew became prisoners of war, but were treated with remarkable courtesy by American authorities, who were intensely fascinated by the large Type 10D cargo submarine and its unusual payload. Herschel spent 8 months in an American prisoner of war camp in Maryland. In stark contrast to the brutal conditions experienced in Soviet captivity, where many German prisoners perished, American camps provided adequate food, comprehensive medical care, and humane treatment. Herschel utilized his skills as an electrician, repaired radios, and taught German to American intelligence officers preparing for occupation duty. He was repatriated to Germany in January 1946. Upon returning to Hamburg, Herschel discovered that his family home had been obliterated by Allied bombing. His father had died in a raid, while his mother and sister had survived but were residing in a refugee camp. Germany was in ruins, divided and occupied. Herschel undertook various jobs, including electrical work, ship repair, and serving as a translator for British occupation forces. In the 1950s, he began compiling his memoir, drawing from a secret diary he had meticulously kept throughout the war. The book was published in Germany in 1972, offering Germans an unsentimental account of U-boat life from the perspective of a crew member rather than a commanding officer. Herschel's diary entries, dating back to 1942, chronicled the unsettling transition from a state of confidence to one of terror as Allied sonar capabilities progressively improved. Early entries described successful attacks, harrowing near misses, and the strong camaraderie among the crew. Later entries documented mounting losses, failed operations, and the psychological deterioration of men who understood they were being relentlessly hunted by technology they could not evade. The final entries from 1945 reflected not defiance, but a profound sense of resignation. "We knew the war was lost," he wrote. "We knew most of us would die. But we kept going because that was what warriors did, even when the cause was hopeless and unjust." The technological lesson learned was stark and irrefutable. Submarine warfare had undergone a fundamental and irreversible transformation. The advent of active sonar meant that the oceans could no longer provide the same degree of concealment for submerged vessels that they had in the war's earlier years. Every navy worldwide meticulously studied the Battle of the Atlantic, absorbing the brutal education in underwater detection. Post-war submarine development focused intensely on noise reduction, on minimizing acoustic signatures, and on evading increasingly sophisticated sonar systems. The perpetual cat-and-mouse game between submarine stealth and detection technology had entered a new and ongoing phase that continues to this day. Modern submarine warfare owes its foundational principles to the lessons painstakingly learned in the Atlantic Ocean between 1939 and 1945. Every navy subsequently invested heavily in quieting technologies to drastically reduce their sonar signatures. Hull designs were increasingly optimized for acoustic stealth. To counteract the ever-advancing capabilities of Allied sonar, naval vessels began incorporating specialized coatings designed to absorb acoustic pulses, becoming a standard feature. Propeller designs were meticulously refined to minimize noise generated by cavitation. Critical mechanical systems were mounted on specialized vibration-isolating components. The overarching objective remained constant: to re-establish the stealth that German U-boats had lost as Allied sonar technology matured. Following the war's conclusion, the Soviet Union acquired several of the advanced Type 21 submarines, along with numerous German engineers. These acquisitions formed the foundation for the development of the Whiskey-class submarines, which subsequently dominated Soviet naval shipbuilding throughout the 1950s. Soviet naval architects conducted an exhaustive examination of the Type 21's design, paying particular attention to its noise reduction features. They astutely recognized that the future of submarine warfare would be defined by the escalating competition between evasion and detection. Consequently, Soviet submarines integrated rubberized anechoic tiles, enhanced propeller configurations, and machinery isolation techniques directly derived from the German Type 21 technology. The United States Navy undertook comprehensive testing of captured U-boats, specifically models U-2513 and U-3008, both of which were Type 21 variants. These vessels had been surrendered in May 1945. American engineers were notably impressed by the submarine's streamlined hull contours, their substantial battery capacity, and their sophisticated hydraulic systems. These particular features significantly influenced the design of the Tang-class submarines, which represented America's inaugural class of purpose-built vessels commissioned after the war. The Tang class adopted the distinctive teardrop hull shape pioneered by German designers, which effectively doubled the underwater speed compared to their World War II predecessors. Britain's Royal Navy subjected the U-2511 to rigorous trials, employing it in exercises against escort formations equipped with the most up-to-date ASDIC systems. The outcomes of these tests were a stark and sobering revelation. Even with advancements in sonar technology, pinpointing and maintaining a lock on a submerged submarine that was both fast and exceptionally quiet proved to be an exceedingly arduous task. These exercises unequivocally demonstrated that, had the Type 21 boats been deployed in substantial numbers during 1943, they would have presented a formidable threat to Allied anti-submarine operations. This critical realization profoundly shaped British submarine development for the subsequent decade, culminating in the Porpoise-class vessels, which incorporated numerous elements from the Type 21 design. On the detection front, sonar systems underwent an exponential surge in sophistication. Passive sonar arrays gained the capability to detect submarines from distances spanning hundreds of miles. Active sonar systems evolved into multi-frequency configurations that could effectively counter most known countermeasures. Furthermore, advanced computer processing enabled the automatic classification of detected targets. This intense technological arms race between submarine stealth and detection capabilities emerged as a central characteristic of the Cold War, serving as a direct consequence of the experiences forged in the Battle of the Atlantic. American sonar development during the 1950s yielded groundbreaking advancements. The SQS-4 sonar, introduced in 1952, possessed the capacity to track targets at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. Variable depth sonar systems, towed behind surface vessels on long cables, could be submerged beneath thermal layers, allowing for the detection of submarines operating at greater depths. Networks of sonobuoys, deployed from aircraft, established acoustic surveillance grids across strategically vital maritime choke points. By the 1960s, American anti-submarine forces had achieved detection capabilities that were orders of magnitude more advanced than those available during World War II. Soviet submariners found themselves facing a situation remarkably analogous to that of German U-boat crews in 1943. They were being relentlessly hunted by sonar technology that effectively stripped away their underwater sanctuary. Soviet naval archives, declassified after the Cold War, revealed that submarine commanders in the 1960s and 70s described the psychological impact of Western sonar systems using language strikingly similar to that employed by their German predecessors. The incessant pinging, the chilling awareness that their position was known, the profound sense of helplessness while being tracked by unseen technology beneath the waves. This relentless competition compelled both sides to push their technological boundaries to the extreme. Soviet submarines progressively became quieter through the implementation of advanced propeller designs, sophisticated rubber coatings, and innovative propulsion systems. Concurrently, American submarines adopted comparable technologies while simultaneously developing even more sensitive passive sonar arrays. This competition reached its zenith with the advent of nuclear-powered submarines, whose virtually unlimited underwater endurance afforded them the genuine capability of remaining submerged for extended periods, often months at a time. However, even these technologically advanced nuclear submarines remained susceptible to acoustic detection. The fundamental lesson derived from the Battle of the Atlantic, namely that sonar possessed the capability to dismantle submarine invisibility, remained undeniably valid. The human element, however, remained a constant factor. Submarine crews across all navies grasped the same critical understanding that German submariners had learned through brutal experience. Detection equated to vulnerability. The distinctive ping of active sonar striking a hull evoked the same primal fear in American, British, Soviet, and French submariners as it did in their German counterparts. That sound signified that the enemy was aware of their location, could track their movements, and was capable of launching attacks. The psychological reality of submarine warfare, irrevocably shaped by the experiences of 1943 to 1945, persisted unchanged. In 1985, 40 years after the cessation of hostilities, a small assembly of German submarine veterans convened informally in the United States. These former U-boat personnel, some accompanied by their families, journeyed to witness firsthand the nation whose technological prowess had ultimately defeated them. Herbert Verer, then 75 years of age and a long-settled resident of America, engaged in conversations with several veterans regarding their shared wartime experiences. We entered the war with an unwavering belief in our invincibility beneath the waves, Vera recounted to the assembled group. We were taught that the ocean's depths served as our protection, that submerging meant complete disappearance. For a brief period, this indeed seemed to be the case. Then we encountered your sonar. He continued. That sound, that metallic pinging impacting our hulls, taught us that the ocean no longer concealed us. We learned a profound fear, a fear that surface sailors could never truly comprehend. We were unable to see our adversary, incapable of retaliating, and could only await our fate in the darkness while your technology relentlessly hunted us. We were defeated by science, by engineering, and by the capacity of free societies to innovate at a pace far exceeding our ability to adapt. Those among us who survived did so largely through sheer fortune. We honor our fallen comrades by upholding this truth. We were not invincible supermen in unbreakable machines. We were young men in obsolete submarines, sent into battle against technology that was simply beyond our capacity to overcome. A somber silence fell over the small gathering. Then, a quiet acknowledgement permeated the atmosphere, a shared understanding passing between the American and German veterans. Former adversaries, united in their recognition of a profound transformation that had seemed utterly inconceivable when those initial sonar pings first struck German hulls in the early years of the war. They acknowledged the stark lesson etched into the 30,000 submarine wrecks resting at the bottom of the Atlantic. Superior technological prowess, coupled with formidable industrial capacity and relentless scientific innovation, had proven to be a more decisive factor than courage, skill, or sheer determination. The German U-boat experience with Allied sonar stands as one of history's most lucid illustrations of how rapidly military technology can fundamentally alter the strategic balance. In 1939, German submarines were virtually undetectable when submerged, their presence only revealed through chance encounters or glaring operational errors. By 1944, advanced sonar systems possessed the ability to track submarines continuously, meticulously plotting their three-dimensional movements and guiding weaponry with deadly precision. The underwater sanctuary had been systematically dismantled through the application of scientific principles and engineering excellence. For the men who served aboard U-boats, this technological revolution transcended mere tactical defeat. It represented a fundamental psychological upheaval. They had commenced the war as unseen predators, confident in their ability to strike and vanish without a trace. They concluded it as hunted quarry, perpetually detected and relentlessly pursued, acutely aware that the resonant ping of sonar striking their hulls had become the unmistakable auditory signature of their obsolescence. The broader strategic implications were nothing short of decisive. British imports of essential food and war materials, which had plummeted to critically low levels by March 1943, experienced a dramatic recovery as U-boat effectiveness waned. The massive deployment of American forces in Britain, preparatory to the D-Day landings, proceeded with minimal disruption. The vital Atlantic supply line, which Winston Churchill later described as the sole factor that truly instilled fear in him during the war, was secured. Germany's ambitious strategy to cripple Britain through a relentless submarine blockade had ultimately failed, defeated as much by the relentless advance of sonar technology as by the combined efforts of depth charges and aircraft. In the final analysis, the narrative of German U-boat crews encountering Allied sonar is a profound story of technological surprise, subsequent adaptation, eventual failure, and ultimate capitulation. German submariners entered the war with justified confidence in their inherent invisibility and exited it as the military service branch, incurring the highest casualty rates of any nation. Between these two stark realities lay 30,000 individual tragedies, men who met their end, drowned within their metal coffins on the Atlantic floor, victims of a technology they were powerless to counteract. The sound that irrevocably transformed the nature of submarine warfare The metallic ping of sonar pulses impacting steel hulls carried a stark and simple message. The ocean no longer offered concealment. Surface technology now possessed the means to penetrate the deepest reaches. There was no longer any sanctuary. For the German submarine crews, this message arrived far too late to save their lives, but early enough to permanently reshape submarine doctrine for generations to come. Their harrowing experience, which resulted in an almost 75% casualty rate, fundamentally taught the world's navies that the landscape of underwater warfare had been irrevocably altered. Invisibility was no longer a guarantee. Detection was now an ever-present possibility. And within that stark possibility lay the definitive end to the dominance of submarines as German U-boat commanders had understood it in 1940. The enduring legacy of those sonar pings continues to resonate in every submarine that traverses the world's oceans, in every sophisticated detection system designed to locate them, and in every naval doctrine that strives for either stealth or the ability to expose an enemy's presence. The German U-boat crews, who were the first to experience that terrifying metallic resonance striking their hulls, paid with their very lives to impart a lesson that transcends their ultimate defeat. Technological advancement invariably reshapes warfare at a pace that outstrips the adaptability of training, established doctrine, or even sheer courage. Those who fail to acknowledge and adapt to significant technological shifts in warfare do not merely suffer tactical setbacks. They risk losing entire campaigns, entire wars, and, with grim frequency, their own lives. The silent hulks resting on the Atlantic seabed represent 30,000 poignant accounts of men who learned, far too late, that their assumed ocean sanctuary had been systematically eroded by the relentless march of science. Their narrative stands as a powerful testament to a fundamental truth of modern conflict. Technological superiority consistently trumps traditional military virtues. The Allied sonar that detected German U-boats proved more decisive than their torpedo tubes, more effective than the inherent courage of their crews, and ultimately more significant than the tactical acumen of their commanders. It was, in essence, the weapon that effectively ended the U-boat threat and secured Allied victory in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. And for the men who endured its relentless, insistent pinging in the profound darkness beneath the waves, it was the sound that irrevocably marked their grim transition from hunter to hunted, from unseen predator to exposed prey, from confident warrior to terrified victim of an inescapable technological dominion.